The most fascinating part of photosynthesis is in every leaf and lies deep in the chloroplast, in what's called the thylakoid membrane. That's right, I'm talking about the photosynthetic electron transport chain. This transport chain is part of photosynthesis' light-dependent reactions. It produces ATP, a form of long-term energy storage, and NADPH, another form of energy storage, but also an electron donor used later in photosynthesis. So let's get into it. Here we have a thylakoid membrane that separates the interior thylakoid space from the exterior stroma. The chain starts with water, which donates an electron and deposits it into photosystem 2. Photosystems are pigments that absorb light energy so that the electrons can move forward in the transport chain. So, the electrons move through the transport chain to photosystem 1, which also absorbs light energy to keep the electrons moving. Photosystem 1 moves the electrons to the end of the transport chain, where 2 electrons are passed to NADP+, which uses these 2 electrons and 1 proton to create NADPH, one of the main products of the light-dependent reactions. However, the coolest part about the electron transport chain is that as water donates electrons, an accumulation of protons builds up on one side of the thylakoid membrane, specifically the interior space. This creates what's known as a proton gradient, meaning that there is an excess of protons on one side of the membrane, the thylakoid space. So, to even out the gradient, the protons must travel across the membrane. But, how do they do that? So, let's go back to our model. To get across the membrane, the protons will travel through a protein called ATP synthase. As the protons travel through, the ATP synthase uses the kinetic energy or movement energy of the protons to create ATP, which is the other main product of the light-dependent reactions. So let's do a little recap. First, water donates electrons and deposits them directly into photosystem 2. Then, those donated electrons travel all the way through the transport chain, getting more energy to move from photosystem 1. The electrons leave the transport chain by being passed to NADP+, which uses them to synthesize NADPH. However, while the water donates electrons, its protons accumulate and build up on one side of the membrane, creating a proton gradient. So, to even out the distribution of protons, they travel across the membrane through ATP synthase. Finally, ATP synthase uses the movement energy secreted by the protons to synthesize ATP. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed.